September 5th, 1977. Liftoff at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. Voyager 1 probe is launched into space. Its mission is to conduct close-up studies of Jupiter and Saturn, along with the larger moons of both planets. January 1979. The spacecraft begins photographing Jupiter. A few years later, after the flyby of Saturn, the ringed planet's gravity flings Voyager high up out of the plane of the planets. It begins its planned journey towards interstellar space. Valentine's Day, 1990. At the request of astronomer Carl Sagan, Voyager points its camera back toward home for a final look and snaps the Family Portrait series, the first ever photos of the planets taken from the outer edge of the solar system, 3.7 billion miles from Earth. Among them is the now famous shot in which planet Earth appears as a tiny point of brightness, a pale blue dot, just barely visible in the vastness of space, floating like a mote of dust in a beam of light. Carl Sagan later wrote eloquently of the meaning of this photo. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe. We are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceit than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish this pale blue dot, the only home we've ever had. For Sagan, and the many who've been inspired by his words, the pale blue dot is a humbling sight, puncturing human pride, deflating our delusions of grandeur. It is, moreover, a reminder that we're all alone in the cosmos with no one out there to come to the rescue and only ourselves to depend on. The photo leaves us overwhelmed with a sense of our own insignificance as well as our shared vulnerability. This combination, says Sagan, urgently reminds us of the moral imperative we face, to turn away from cruelty and hatred lest we perish. W.H. Auden said it best, we must love one another or die. 1 year ago this weekend, a shooter burst into Tree of Life congregation in Pittsburgh, shattering the peace of Shabbat, shattering our illusions of safety. Tonight we join congregations all over America in noting this painful anniversary. We mark it with sorrow and a renewed commitment to stand together against all forms of hate. But this occasion also calls us to rededicate ourselves to the tree of life to which these murdered worshipers were clinging when the killer cut them down. On that Shabbat morning, last October, the small Pittsburgh congregation had gathered like Jews throughout the world to study and reflect on the Torah. Torat Chaim ve'avat chesed, a teaching of life, of loving kindness, mercy, justice, and peace. So let us honor them tonight by holding fast, as they did, to the tree of life and opening ourselves to its teachings. This week we are reading Bereshit, the biblical story of creation. Remarkably, our creation story ends up very much in the same place as Carl Sagan, but it gets there by a very different route. For the Bible, human beings are defined by their double nature, formed of the dust of earth, yet imbued with a spark of the divine spirit, for God has breathed into them the breath of life. Thus, we are creatures of earthy appetites and spiritual aspirations, both noble and ignoble, petty and grand, torn by conflicting impulses towards good and evil, astounding in our capabilities, and equally so in our propensity to do harm. The Bible makes this duality very clear, celebrating human beings when they first appear as reflecting the divine image, then showing how swiftly they descend into savage aggression. Within 4 chapters, we witness the first murder, Cain and Abel, like all murders, a fratricide. A piercing question uttered in God's voice rises up from the text and still reverberates today. What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. It is here that the Bible diverges most strikingly from Sagan's view. For our sacred text proclaims again and again that we are accountable to someone else, that we are not alone in the cosmos, but summoned by the voice of goodness itself and called to answer to that voice. It is this higher call that helps us rise above our own destructive drives, reminding us always that we can be better. To respond to the call is to accept responsibility for ourselves, for others, for the communities we create. The study and practice of Torah is meant to keep us tuned into that voice, for it is easily drowned out in the tumult of daily life. How can Torah speak to us today? In a world in which the story of Cain and Abel plays on and on in an endless, agonizing loop. Listen to a teaching of Rabbi Joseph Ibn Kaspi, born in Provence in the 13th century. No stranger to violence and persecution, Ibn Kaspi saw the Jews of France stripped of their property and banished from the country. He asked, as we do, what can be done about cruelty and hate? How to tame the beast within and make a more peaceful world? His answer was that Torah schools us in the practice of love. Torah law, he says, deliberately entwines us in a broad network of relationships, diminishing human arrogance, constantly expanding our capacity for empathy. He wrote, "We are, as is known, composed of 4 substances: mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. These are the 4 categories of created things. In our pride, we foolishly imagine that there is no kinship between us and the rest of the animal world, how much less with plants and vegetation. To eradicate this foolish notion, God gave us special mitzvot, some concerning the mineral realm, others the vegetable, others animal, and others human." We all know that the Torah is full of laws and mitzvot about how to treat other people, the most famous of which are, of course, love your neighbor as yourself and love and befriend the stranger. All such commandments are grounded in the belief that the entire human race is descended from the same primal couple, Adam and Eve. Thus, all of us are one family. But the Torah goes further than this. As Ibn Kaspi points out, the Torah wants human beings to grasp their kinship with animals as well. So we find in the Torah a profusion of laws about sparing animals pain, both physical and emotional, and a clear intention that human beings should ultimately be vegetarian. These laws are meant to train us to develop empathy and compassion for animals. For in a broader sense, we too are family, sharing the fellowship of all living creatures. And this isn't the end of it. Ibn Kaspi says that the Torah also wants us to be aware of our kinship with plant life, creatures farther removed from us whose similarity to us is much harder to discern. Torah law requires, for instance, that fruit trees must not be cut down in time of war. Human battles must not be allowed to damage these harmless non-combatants and to wreak ecological disaster by destroying vegetation. Here, too, we're meant to look beyond human concerns to empathize with beings of another order. Finally, Torah laws help make us aware of our connection even with inanimate objects, specifically with the earth, the very substance of our bodies, to which our bodies return in the end. In the Torah, the soil has a vital existence that is profoundly related to the human beings who live on it. The land must rest from cultivation every 7 years. The land where human beings live must not be polluted by human waste. The land is contaminated by bloodshed. The land of Israel is so sacred that it cannot tolerate behavior that is immoral or destructive. Ibn Caspi wrote that the purpose of all these laws in the Torah is to inculcate in us a sense of modesty and humility, that we should be ever cognizant of the fact that we are of the same stuff as the donkey and mule, the cabbage and pomegranate, and even the lifeless stone. What a crazy, radical idea. That all life forms, even from the most primitive to the most advanced, are formed of the same rudimentary materials, and that even the Earth's minerals are related to us in some fundamental way. The poet Marge Piercy dared to say the same thing in her great work entitled Nishmat, the Breath of All Life. We are given the body, that momentary kibbutz of elements that have belonged to frog and polar bear, corn and oak tree, volcano and glacier. And how astonishing it is that this beautiful and poetic spiritual idea turns out to be confirmed by science as well. The common code of DNA shared by all life testifies to our common evolutionary origin. We are, it turns out, part of a vast, intricate family that includes flowers and snails and slime mold and yeast, and even, in a sense, the universe itself. As Carl Sagan famously said, our bodies are literally made of star stuff, for the elements within them originated in cosmic explosions billions of years ago. Just as the Torah's elegant creation story tells us, our beginnings are in oneness. So too, our future depends on remaining conscious of that oneness. So the sacred voice summons us, even now, to recognize the magnificent unity of all that lives, to act with care and responsibility towards all creatures that share this planet with us, and to honor the earth itself. So the voice of Torah calls us to respond. I set before you this day life and good, death and evil. Therefore, choose life that you and your children shall live. We must love one another or die. So we voyage, believers and non-believers, on separate paths, but we meet up at the junction called human kindness. We view with similar dismay how quickly life on earth slips into mayhem, how easily the creature the Bible calls but little lower than the angels morphs into predatory beast. And together, believers and non-believers, we place our hope in all that might save us and bring a better world. Reason and law, modesty and moral restraint, vigorous activism, social responsibility, the call of conscience, the practice of love. A year after the pale blue dot photograph was taken, Maya Angelou composed a prayer in the form of a poem. She called it A Brave and Startling Truth. We, this people, on a small and lonely planet, traveling through casual space, past aloof stars, across the way of indifferent suns, to a destination where all signs tell us it is possible and imperative that we learn a brave and startling truth. And when we come to it, to the day of peacemaking, when we release our fingers from fists of hostility and allow the pure air to cool our palms, when we come to it, when the curtain falls on the minstrel show of hate and faces sooted with scorn are scrubbed clean, when battlefields and coliseums no longer rake our unique and particular sons and daughters up with the bruised and bloody grass to lie in identical plots on foreign soil. When we come to it, when we let the rifles fall from our shoulders and children dress their dolls in flags of truce, when landmines of death have been removed and the aged can walk into evenings of peace, when religious ritual is not perfumed by the incense of burning flesh and childhood dreams are not kicked awake by nightmares of abuse, when we come to it, then we will confess that not the pyramids with their stones set in mysterious perfection, nor the gardens of Babylon hanging as eternal beauty in our collective memory, not the Grand Canyon kindled into delicious color by western sunsets, nor the Danube flowing its blue soul into Europe, not the sacred peak of Mount Fuji stretching to the rising sun, neither Father Amazon nor Mother Mississippi, who without favor nurture all creatures in the depths and on the shores. These are not the only wonders of the world. When we come to it, we, this people, on this minuscule and kithless globe, who reach daily for the bomb, the blade, and the dagger, yet who petition in the dark for tokens of peace. We, this people, on this mote of matter, in whose mouths abide cankerous words which challenge our very existence, yet out of those same mouths come songs of such exquisite sweetness that the heart falters in its labor and the body is quieted into awe. We, this people, on this small and drifting planet, whose hands can strike with such abandon that in a twinkling life is sapped from the living, yet those same hands can touch with such healing, irresistible tenderness. Out of such chaos, of such contradiction, we learn that we are neither devils nor divines. When we come to it, we, this people, on this wayward floating body, created on this earth, of this earth, have the power to fashion for this earth a climate where every man and every woman can live freely, without sanctimonious piety, without crippling fear. When we come to it, we must confess that we are the possible, we are the miraculous, the true wonder of this world. That is when and only when we come to it. Sometime in the summer of 2012, Voyager 1 sailed out of our solar bubble into the vast reaches of interstellar space. Today, 42 years after its launch, 13.7 billion miles from Earth, it is the most distant human-made object in the universe. Its camera was turned off years ago, yet its radio signal, still transmitting, can be detected by powerful radio telescopes, shining forth as a tiny glow in the infinite darkness of space. So the voice of goodness still speaks to those whose ears are attuned, offering light in the darkness and hope for a suffering world. Choose life, it says. We must love one another or die.